It's a very important part of the market. If you look back to 2022, November 2022, we had the Paul Allen sale. It was the largest single owner sale in the history of the world. So we're talking about a really important moment that happened then. It was $1.5 billion. So you're talking about 2% of the entire global art market in one person's collection that came for sale that year. And then you had 2023 and 24 where it really went quiet, relatively speaking, in that category. And so when that happened, we were talking about this as much as 2 years ago to our clients, that it had a lot more to do with sellers being willing to sell than buyers being willing to buy. That we were in a perception that we were in a buyer's market, and so sellers were holding back during that time. But there's really only so long that can go on, and that tide has started to shift a little bit. So we saw just, again, this last November, the Leonard Lauder sale, which was about a $500 million sale. So again, about 1% of the entire global market in one person's collection that came for sale, and that's very important. I like to point out, though, that is happening, and we are seeing a return to that. But there's also, and it's not talked about as much as coming out of the data, we're at a record high volume of transactions as well. So yes, it is a very important top tier of that market, and that's always the case. But we also have an incredible number of very low dollar amount transactions that are happening, both at auction and with galleries. And so what I see in that moment is it's sort of like creative destruction happening in process. We're watching it happen. There's basically this churn of under $50,000 sales that are a very important part of the market. But truly what kind of moves that headline number year to year are those big single owner sales, those very high value artworks.
So Matthew, one of the things that stood out to me on the report, when I was just digging through the report, I saw this large increase in old masters. And I was like, wow, look at the old masters outperformed the other categories. But then when I dug into it, such a small piece of the market compared to the overall art market. So maybe talk to our listeners about the difference between kind of where the old masters sit and the broader market out there for everyone.
Sure. It is true. It's a really interesting part of the market. Modern and contemporary work, so the newer stuff, is definitely still by far the dominant category of the market. A lot of it has to do with, old masters has been growing lately, but it's still a small piece because there's just not a lot that comes to sale that people want. So a lot of that work is in museum institutions, or it's with families that have had it for generations and they're not selling it. So I've seen sort of two things happen. When you do have something come to market that's a recognizable name, people understand. And so this would be like this Michelangelo drawing that we had sell recently. It was a small drawing of a foot in a small piece of paper and sold for $27 million. It's sort of really, there's a tremendous amount of demand when you can get it. But then there's also this other part where, there's collectors that are going back in history and looking like, who are the artists that we didn't talk about that were making work then?